Hi, I'm Dr. Amy French. I'm a history professor at Delta College and also the Humanities Learning Center coordinator there. And one of the things that I was super excited about doing was having a host of brown bag presentations for the centennial of US women getting the vote. And unfortunately, the public health crisis has made it so that it's unsafe for us to gather together for the normal brown bag presentations that the Humanities Learning Center offers. But I can share history with you this way. And so I'm going to videotape. Now, I have already done, I'm calling this misbehaving women because women who behave seldom make history. So the first section where we talk about the precursor to the Votes for Women movement with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and the like, and they're gathered together in Seneca Falls, that you can see in a different view or different video. But in this one, we're going to take it from the kind of the progressive movement era. So from the late 1890s into the time that women get the vote. So let me share my screen with you here so that you can see the PowerPoint that I have ready. And now I'm up here in a little corner and you guys can see the cartoons and the PowerPoint presentations I have prepared for you. Okay, so votes for women, votes for women. It was, this modern new kind of way. This cartoon is from 1902. And it shows all the fears, kind of the same fears I showed in the first video when we talked about history. In this, it shows, it confronts that whole idea that there are separate spheres for women and men, and a woman's place is in the home and a man's is out in public. And that if women got the vote, then would there be gender role reversal? So here we see the man, he's diminutive in size. He looks browbeaten. He's got a furrowed brow here. He looks scared. The children are crying. He's the caretaker. He's wearing an apron, so that's shown in kind of a way to emasculate him. You can see even can you see the little cat down here? The little cat's scared of him, or of her. The tea kettle is going off in the background, so there's absolute chaos. There's a broken plate on the floor. And we see her, and she's looking quite derisive at him. She's almost holding back her hand in a very aggressive manner. And she's looking at him very disdainfully, I think. And so that's in the cartoon's titled Election Day. So, this is the fear that will happen if women get the vote. So that's what the Votes for Women, the new suffragists, were up against, is they are, trying to combat this, and they're going to do things a little bit differently than literally their mother in Harriet Stanton Blatch's case. Harriet Stanton Blatch is the daughter of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. But they're going to do a little bit different than the earlier generation had done. And they're going to go for widespread political mobilization. They're going to really cross the party lines in ways that, or cross, not sorry, the party lines, but different lines. They're going to cross cultural lines and ethnic lines, and racial lines and class lines in ways that the first group hadn't done. And so one of the groups that that is helping with this is the progressive movement. Now the progressives, they're not a real, there was a progressive party, but they don't really define when we think about progressives. We think about these people who were goo-goos or for good government. They're trying to put laws in place, things like drug laws and pure drug and food acts, and they're trying to have safety reforms and factory reforms, and they're calling for fire escapes, and they're saying there needs to be screening around vats of hot materials, and they're very much a group that is really focused on protecting women and children. They're very pro-democracy. They are pro-capitalism. They're very much heavily middle class. They're heavily female. There are people who they want to reform society. They think society can be better, and they're trying to put laws in place to do that. And so it makes sense to them, to a lot of them, that women would have the vote because in order to do so, then they could have that true democracy. I mean, so when you look at some of the things the progressives did, they made it so that regular voters could put in place laws. They made it so that regular voters could recall politicians that had previously been elected. And they made it so that regular voters could repeal unpopular laws or ineffective laws. So they have done a lot to try to empower the voter. And so for some of them, now that's the thing about those progressives, they're undefinable because they don't many of them are just single cause crusaders. You know, they're really not getting the whole, it's not like they're signing on to the progressive initiative, you know, line of things. They might be one thing. They might be, I want pure food and drug. When I eat something, I don't want my butter adulterated with cocaine or whatever. You know, they might be saying that. Some of the others then, they might be saying, you know, I think women need to have the vote. Some might say, no, I don't think women need to have the vote. So there's a different thing, but they're very much influential in this widespread mobilization, which I really do believe is part of the reason that we have that we have the 9th Amendment come about when it does. It is just very much a part of it. It's a huge piece. As is, you know, the part where they're crossing class movements. And so you have people like, for one thing, they're reaching out to wage earners. Before this had been, you know, they had been really focused on middle class women. In fact, reaching out here to like women's clubs and college educated women was seen as, you know, we're reaching out to different groups. And so reaching out to people like Mary Kenny O'Sullivan in the Women's Trade Union League was a huge movement. You know, there's a lot of discrimination within the movement. There's a lot of women in the mainstream suffrage movement whom are, for one reason or another, they're not necessarily wanting to enfranchise everyone. And so we'll talk about that in a second. And so there are a lot of marginalized voices. African American women, we have the National Association of Colored Women, led by women like Mary Church Terrell and Ida Wells Barnett. And they do a lot of suffrage movement, suffrage activism, but they're often excluded from more of the mainstream movement, as well as other notable African American suffragists like Mary Ann Shadd Cary or Frances Harper. Mexican American women, same problem. They're having a hard time being accepted into the mainstream movement. They formed the League of Mexican Women, and you have people like Jovita Idar and Teresa Villarreal. And so you've got all these groups, and the thing is they're all influential, you know? I mean, for their group, they're changing it, and it has to be this. So although conventional histories tend to leave out a lot of these groups down here, it's not to say that they weren't absolutely influential in getting the amendment passed, because they were. Okay, so the 19th Amendment, let's talk about it. What's going on? Well, there's a lot of organized opposition to it. And that's part of why it takes so long to get it passed, is because of this organized opposition. And here you can see this little headquarters opposed to women's suffrage. You can see women are part of that. You know, some women and men were afraid that political rights would cost women moral influence. You know, they're seeing politics as a dirty arena. And they're saying, we have the moral high ground here because we're not involved in politics. And they don't want to lose that. You've got the just discriminatory way of thinking about democracy. And they're afraid, you know, there's some people who are afraid unfit women will be given the vote. They're already worried about unfit men being given the vote. So, you know, remember, this is a time we've got tens of thousands of people coming across the Atlantic Ocean from Europe. And at the turn of the century, you have people who are finding a lot of ethnic discrimination against them from Southern and Eastern Europe that are coming over. And there's, you know, Italians and Greeks, and these groups are finding they're you know, and Catholics as a whole are facing a lot of discrimination. And so there are some people who say, oh, we don't want more people who might not be old guard. So in some respects, the organized opposition is a way for the old guard to stay in power. And then there's also the concern that if women are given the vote, then one of the first things they'll do is something they had done before with reform, and that's push for temperance. And so they're afraid that there's going to be a prohibition, laws put in place. And of course, the 18th Amendment precedes the 19th Amendment for a reason, right? And that's because that was one concern that was taken off the table. When the 18th Amendment, the Prohibition Amendment, was enacted, at that point then, the fear that if women are given the vote, they'll enact prohibition, it was a moot point at that point. So we've got a whole new group of people. We have the Congressional Union. They're an offshoot of NAWSA. So the National Women's Suffrage Association has by this point become the NAWSA, the National American Women's Suffrage Association, where it's combined two of the older groups together. And the Congressional Union is working on an amendment. Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, they are calling on Congress and pressuring Congress for a federal change to the Constitution. They say that state-by-state laws, so we had seen a state-by-state campaign really going throughout the 1800s, and they're saying now nothing less than a constitutional amendment will do the trick. And so there's a suffrage parade on March 3rd of 1913. This is the day that Woodrow Wilson's coming in for his inauguration. And it's kind of a precursor of some of the problems he will face. I mean, he will also face the First World War as a president, but one of the things he'll face is that women are being abused on his doorstep, literally. So this DC parade, the women are dressed in white. There's one woman in Esmeralda, top of a white horse, and they're with their children and they're marching, and they're attacked. So they're attacked by the crowd. And so, that gives... it shows, I think, that people had thought that, women, genteel, no one would attack a woman. And so when the groups, have rocks and bottles and things thrown at them, it tells Wilson, gives him a signal, this is going to be an issue he will need to confront. Lucy Burns and Alice Paul then go on to form the National Women's Party. They are a more militant group. They're changing the name because they want to reflect the electoral focus of strategy. And they want, this is about having some longevity. So after 1920, when women get the vote, the National Women's Party then goes for an Equal Rights Amendment. I think in 1924, they'll go for an Equal Rights Amendment. One of the things that the NWP does is they start picketing the White House. And so this picture down here shows you, Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? This was very controversial. Many people thought that it was unsavory for women to do such a thing, especially when the Great War broke out. So when World War I erupted, they said, this is, awful, that women would do this. They called the women unpatriotic. Carrie Catt was the president at that time of NAWSA, and she never really was, she's not really, she's certainly not militant whatsoever. She's not one to pick up her picket sign and stand in front of the White House. But she said, when war murders the husbands and sons of women, it becomes the undeniable business of women. And so with that, they're saying this is important to the cause. This is important to the effort. And the women, the picketers, they start talking about, they say, Mr. President, you're so concerned because Germans are denying their people democracy. Look at your own country. Half your country is disenfranchised. Half your country is being denied democracy. And so they demand democracy at home. And they say, how long must we wait for liberty? And in the end, between, over the picketing, 168 women are arrested. 97 of them serve up to 6 months in federal prison. They go on hunger strikes, and they gather a lot of attention. Whether positive or negative, people have suffrage on the map. They're paying attention to what's going on. Woodrow Wilson even uses and says that suffrage should be a war measure. And he goes before Congress and he says, we have made partners of women in this war. Shall we admit them only to a partnership of suffering and sacrifice and toil, and not to a partnership of privilege and right? And they don't really listen to him, but things continue. And the women manage to secure. They go, and they manage by June of 1919, they've secured exactly 2/3 of Congress's votes, the Congress necessary to vote. And then it goes to the states for ratification. They won, I think, largely because it was a large, diverse movement with broad class base that drew on decades of activism. It's not one single thing, it's all this together. And so on August 26, 1920, then we have the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, stating the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. And with this, women get the vote. So, you know, it's a happy story, but there are still some challenges. And so continuing challenges, there's citizenship issues. So, you know, it gave every citizen, like, you know, the rights of citizens of the United States shall not be denied. But who weren't citizens at this time? Well, Native Americans are often not citizens at this time. We have many Mexican Americans who aren't citizens. We have many Asian Americans who aren't citizens. So various laws, previous laws had made it so that there were many groups who, some of whom predated the United States of America, that were not considered citizens of the United States of America. So those groups are still disenfranchised. And, you know, one by one throughout the 20th century, we'll see these groups start to, you know, in 1924, you see the Indian Citizenship Act. It was about Asian Americans, World War II era, they started to get citizenships. Mexican Americans had a very difficult past, and still in many ways fighting for citizenship. And then, you know, so African Americans had the right, but there's a difference between having a right and being able to exercise it. Those are two completely different things. So depending on what state you were in, depending even necessarily on what county you lived in, African Americans or people of color as a whole might have faced incredible persecution. They might have faced intimidation, violence, different types of tactics, restrict to register to vote, restrictions to cast a ballot. So then in 1965, the Voting Rights Act makes it so that it becomes then federally protected and does away with a lot of or at least gives people of color the ability to have a federal law to point to say, I am being discriminated against. You do not have the right to deny me this right of citizenship. In the end, I mean, we still have a battle for parity and power in politics. I mean, that's still going on. Women are still, you know, they are a very small percentage of the overall realm. We still have not had women in many seats of leadership in the United States, or they're grossly misrepresented. We're generally half the population, or even maybe a little bit more. And we're not seeing anywhere near that in seats of power. So there's a lot to go on, but there's the story. That's the centennial celebration story of suffrage and women getting the vote. I, for one, am very happy for the women before me who fought so hard for this vote. And I try never to forget it as I try to cast my ballot in every single election, even if it's a minor one. I believe in democracy. So thanks for staying with me today and listening to this tale. I hope you have a great day. Bye.